Coming up next on Twitch, this week in computer hardware, SSDs are failing. AMD's awesome Llano Graphics seeded backup RAM upgrades, and the threats, well, you're going to find out next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust. This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 118, recorded May 5th, 2011. Tri-Gate makes everything better.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies streamed to your PC, Mac, or TV instantly. Plus, get DVDs by mail in about one business day. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit.
Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton, joined as always by the man, the myth, the traveling legend. Not benchmarking, sunbathing. Is your sunscreen on, Mr. Shrout?
Well, it's nighttime now, but it was earlier. Although I think if you look closely on the video on my forehead, there was a spot that didn't have any sunscreen, unfortunately.
I can see that.
But yeah, doing well. Out of town, enjoying the sun. Last night at my home, I was told that there was a frost warning, so all of my friends that are not on this trip with us were cursing. But
so you're in St. John's, down in the islands again?
I am. I'm in St. John, which is a U.S. Virgin Island. I've never been here before. It's literally kind of empty.
I go to weddings in places like St. Louis and, rural Vermont in January. Right. You're in St. John's.
You got to tell your friends to step up, right?
I tell my family to step up. So we should probably get straight into the big news this week. AMD wept. Why? Because out of nowhere, or not quite out of nowhere, but certainly, big announcement, Intel 3D, CPUs. And everybody's like, oh, new three-dimensional, then you get past the title and you go into it. And it's actually a radical change in the way chips are architected. Traditionally, basically since the 1950s, transistors are flat, they're two-dimensional, they sit on the surface of the silicon substrate and jump in and correct my language at any point. And Intel's like, we've developed a 3D transistor, and it's going to allow us to move electricity, more power, more efficiently, with less leakage. And at this point, we were talking about it before we started, like I'm envisioning instead of flat silicon, these little inch-high cubes, and I'm wondering how they're going to be cooled. And it turns out it's a radical change in how transistors are designed. It's almost like they've put three gates, tri-gates, into a single transistor to allow them better control over the electrical flow. And it's kind of funny. It's like, that's all they did? And then we'll talk about the performance and the power savings in a minute.
Right. Right. I mean, anybody that's a math major, that there's no such thing as an actual 2D object to begin with anyway, right? Unless you in geometry have that theoretical straight, point is only one dimension type of thing. So basically what they've done is they've taken a transistor and made it taller. And the result of that is they have created more surface area for the gate of the transistor, and the gate is responsible for controlling how much electric goes through and how quickly the electric stops, the two very, very important aspects of a transistor. And by adding more surface area to that, it has allowed them to gain more control over that electric, in theory, to allow more current to flow when it's on, less current to flow when it's off, and have quicker capability to turn that on and off easily. Now, this is all in conjunction with a move from a 32 nanometer transistor to a 22 nanometer transistor. To a 22 nanometer transistor, which is their next step. Product shipping late in 2012, probably type of product release schedule. And AMD is also moving to 22 nanometers. GlobalFoundries is moving to 22 nanometers, but they are using standard planar 2D transistors, if we're going to use that terminology on things now. And that's what Intel had been planning on doing, right? They were researching that. I'm sure if you ask the people at Intel, they would tell you that they were looking at planar, they were looking at these Tri-Gate, these 3D transistors, and for their technology, they weren't able to get the performance improvements going from 32 to 22 with the flat transistors. So they have developed a way to do this in 3 dimensions, and this surface area has done some amazing things. If you look at some of the numbers that Intel's quoting in terms of performance improvements, not like benchmark performance improvements, but what actual advantages you get out of it.
Well, it's funny, right? Because 22 nanometers the process. The next drop down is 14 nanometers, and somewhere around 90 nanometers, which is, I want to say, around 2003, 2004. Current leakage became a severe issue. So the idea that the traces on the surface of the chip are so small, they're basically radiating electricity. How small can we get them? How close can we get together? Do we have to move to optical computing? And this is kind of a, because everybody's like, Moore's law, we love Moore's law, we got to keep that Moore's law going, we got to keep, basically Moore's law is all about putting more transistors on the chip as quickly as possible. And so by changing the process they were using in the construction, they were able to get it down to 32 nanometers, and they were going to push and shove and scrape, they were going to get it to 22 nanometers. But this is a fascinating level. Like one of the press releases from Intel is, 6, basically look at a period at the end of a sentence on a web page, and they're going to stuff 6 million transistors in that period. This is, you can geek out, you can get your, numbers of angels, dancing on a pin, but they're basically saying, for equivalent performance levels, a 50% reduction in power, because they can clamp down voltage so much better in this particular construction. And I think we got a picture we've got a picture in the linked in the show notes if you guys want to pull that up on the TriCaster I just dropped in there. But it's a really interesting idea, is that by unless of course Google has failed me once again, or Image Shack has failed once again, but the construction is really fascinating to look at.
Yeah, it is. It's really cool to look at, and like I was saying, that surface area allows it to just have more control, and all this kind of, like you're saying, results in these big percentage improvements in certain areas. If we look at performance per volt, right? How much voltage leakage do you get at certain voltages and that type of thing? And you're seeing, big improvements of, 75 to 80% of the operating voltage of the 32 nanometer transistors that they're using today on the Sandy Bridge parts. So that means in the next generation parts, whether or not we're talking about Ivy Bridge, which is the desktop notebook part, or upcoming Atom processors, that types of thing, you're going to be able to run at the same performance at, in theory, 75% of the operating power. So while this is going to be good news for the desktop in performance, if you look at it from a mobile standpoint, you look at it from battery life on things like your laptop, if you look at it for Intel's push into cell phone markets, they have been struggling on this for so long, right? Moorestown platforms come out, nobody wants to use it. It's big, it's bulky compared to what ARM's processors can do.
Even NVIDIA, like AMD is having success with the Tegra 2 and the smaller chipsets.
No, you're right. NVIDIA.
Or the smaller tablets, which has to be, NVIDIA with the Tegra 2, which has to be driving Intel absolutely crazy because they can't beat ARM. All of a sudden, NVIDIA's got another strong part that they can build their business around. And it's funny because one of the things Intel's been pushing in their press briefings for the last couple of years is, a few years ago it's not about megahertz, it's about the amount of work done per clock cycle, because they basically wanted people to stop looking at faster clock numbers because at some point it gets pointless, right? And a couple of years ago they started up, it's no longer about the amount of work we're doing. Well, of course we're going to build the fastest processors in the planet, but they always, power became the big issue because 5 years ago people were already seeing the writing on the wall that low power consumption is going to be the big deal moving forward in the 21st century. And it's so funny to look at this to be like, wow, this is a radical change in chip architecture. And on the other hand, they still got to build a part that HTC or Apple, because I'm sure they're desperate for Apple's business, are willing to actually buy.
Sure.
And it's funny to look at it. Like Ivy Bridge is going to be really interesting next year, but it's also it's a reminder that the big power consumer in a lot of ways really isn't the chip inside of portable devices. Anything with like bigger than a screen that's a couple inches, the biggest consumer of power is going to be like a 4G modem, a GPS, or the screen. And the screen is the one where, when I'm thinking about like when I want my like 3-day notebook, I want to be able to use a computer for 3 days straight until they have to check me into the hospital from lack of like fluids and sleep. But in order to make that happen, you either are going to have to strap a car battery to your existing notebook, or they're going to have to figure out a way to make power consumption on LED flat panels drop precipitously, and that's an interesting challenge.
One of the things that if we talk about for this particular market and our consumer here, in the notebook and below size, the differences are huge. They're talking about moving from 32 nanometer planar to 22 nanometer tri-gate transistors, a 30% improvement in gate switching speed, and so you get two options here. Do you apply that to better performance or lower battery level, or lower power consumption rather, I'm sorry. And so obviously for the mobile front, what we'll see is a lot of people are going to say, my notebook is fast enough, my tablet netbook does enough type of thing, longer battery life, 37% improvements in that is going to be great. If you look at the desktop, you mentioned Ivy Bridge, 18% is what they're claiming at kind of like that 1 volt level, which is where desktop processors stand. Now we have to wonder if Intel is going to apply that 18% advantage that they're getting with this transistor type towards improved frequencies. Are we going to finally get that 4 gigahertz clock speed processor that has been kind of pie in the sky for a long time? Or are we going to get, current level Sandy Bridge performance, 18% lower voltage or lower power consumption, those types of things? Those are all decisions that Intel's going to be making in next year and in 2013 as well, to see how they're going to apply the advantages that these transistors get. So it's pretty cool stuff. If you've never studied how transistors work, and just the incredible size of them, and by size obviously I mean how incredibly small they are. The news post that we posted on PCPro.com has a video from Intel that's obviously a lot of marketing speak involved, but they do a really good demonstration of here's a human hair, here's the chip we just built, and now we've got to go 10,000 times smaller even to go see one of these transistors type of thing. So I mean it's pretty cool. They even demoed Ivy Bridge running during this press event, right? So they demoed a 22 nanometer microprocessor using the tri-gate transistors. It's in production. This chip, they built an SRAM out of it, which is just like a memory module using 2.9 billion transistors, which is a lot. That's almost as much as Intel's biggest, or Nvidia's biggest GPU, which was a monster. So not much is changing, I guess, for consumers, except that they now, I don't think anybody really worried that we weren't going to see continued improvement in processor technology, but now you definitely don't have to worry about that. Intel's done some really amazing things here. AMD and Global Foundries have some pretty good improvements with their 22 nanometer process planned as well. I don't think they're going to claim any of the wild percentages that Intel's claiming here. But even Intel admitted that they think their competition will be using this type of technology after 22, so at the 14 level that you mentioned before. So they're going to have even more advantage for a little bit. And, some people might wonder if Intel needed a little bit more competition, help move things along a little bit faster. It doesn't look like we're going to get it this month or next year even. So, but it's really, really cool technology. It's going to change a lot of what Intel was doing for 2012.
NVIDIA having a bad quarter. Basically, and it's funny because the line you had here in the show notes is graphics shipments rise 10% despite falling PC sales. NVIDIA shares drop, and so it seems like the integrated GPUs on in the chipset are getting to the point where they're dramatically impacting NVIDIA's bottom line or the GPU market in general.
Yeah, so this report came out from a research firm that focuses on the graphics market and that kind of stuff. And what they were saying is PC sales dropped about 5% from Q4 2010 to Q1 2011. You know, that's bad news, right, for the rest of the industry. But they said graphic shipments go up 10%. And I'm going to put a caveat here because the issue with that statement is they're counting a GPU as either a discrete solution, obviously, like an NVIDIA or an AMD add-in card, and also integrated graphics on Intel Sandy Bridge processors and integrated graphics on Intel or an AMD's Fusion processors. So when you've got your CPU GPU combos, that's being counted as both a processor and a GPU in terms of these shipment numbers. So the 10% rise could be a lot of systems, notebooks, and desktops that are shipping with both a processor that has a Sandy Bridge CPU, or a processor that has a Sandy Bridge GPU in it, and a discrete solution from NVIDIA and AMD as well. So that might be a little bit of where that 10% rise in graphics comes from. But either way, if you look at what NVIDIA has seen is compared to Q1 2010, so if we look at it year over year, their growth is down. Like they've gone from 28% to 20% market share. That's not good news.
Not at all.
Intel's has gone up by like 5%. AMD's gone up like 3%. Obviously, at the expense of, I guess, you do your math, right? 5 is 8% of difference. So, you know, this is kind of what we worried about. This is kind of what NVIDIA's worried about. This is why they're pushing for the ARM-based processors, the Tegra solutions, the Project Denver that they announced at CES. They knew this type of stuff was coming. They knew to expect that their market share in graphics was going to be minimized because of cheap integrated GPUs on processors, and they don't have a processor, so that's the struggle for them. So what I think would have been more interesting numbers to see are excuse me, just the discrete sales, AMD versus NVIDIA, and see how the market share is going that way. This kind of clumps the Intel and AMD integrated all into the same thing. But in the end, numbers are numbers, and they kind of lie and they kind of tell the truth, depending on who you're paying attention to.
Speaking of numbers and numbers, AMD Llano integrated graphics looks like HD 6550. Is that a thumbs up or a thumbs down on performance for Llano?
That's a thumbs up, actually. You know, this is still like in the rumor mill, but they're estimating that the performance of the integrated graphics on the AMD Llano processor that will probably be out in another month or so, getting pretty close to it, is going to be on the performance level of a 6550, which will put it well ahead of what Intel Sandy Bridge processor graphics can do, which is kind of what we expected. You know, we knew AMD was going to have an advantage with all their GPU history and that kind of stuff from the ATI acquisition, and this will be the processor that finally is the fruit of that merger, so to speak. And they have a little diagram, on the on our news post where they show a pie chart of, okay, here's a Llano die, here's a Sandy Bridge die, how big of a percentage of it is x86 cores, how big of a percentage of is Northbridge functions like memory controller, and how much of it is actually graphics. And if you look at the Llano die, you'll see that it looks like 45%, 40% of the die is going to be dedicated to graphics performance. Whereas if you look on Intel's, it's closer to 20% of the die. And that difference is kind of telling you how AMD is able to is going to have better performing GPU parts. So this all comes down to, are you playing games? What are you doing with that GPU portion? AMD's been putting a lot of money for AMD at least, into the program, the Fusion Developer Program, where they're trying to get more and more software to take advantage of those GPU accelerated functionalities, because that's where AMD is going to have an advantage. Their x86 cores are still going to be behind Sandy Bridge, with pretty much what everybody knows, and the graphics is going to be their advantage. But gaming can only get you so far in the mainstream market. You have to show, video transcoding is that key thing, and then what other stuff can you do with processor graphics, that you can't do with just x86 cores. That's what AMD has to prove. But I think a 6550 is going to be pretty impressive. You're going to start to see cannibalizing of that sub $50 graphics card market to be pretty severe.
So, enough for the cheerful news.
Yeah.
To bring it back up, Seagate showing off 1 terabyte per platter hard drives, which, along with some stuff we're going to talk about later on about, it's interesting. If you're familiar with codinghorror.com, it's a website blog that was super, super, super enthusiastic about the SSD, and he's been running into severe failure rates on SSD drive. We'll talk about that after the break. But the place where SSDs, outside of being, more expensive per gigabyte, they're obviously much smaller in capacity. I bring that up because Seagate's looking at 1 terabyte per platter on traditional rotating media, Winchester media, which I was looking at that article and thinking, like, that's kind of exciting, especially when you're thinking about smaller drives and just long-term storage. But 600 aerial density of 625 gigabytes per square inch.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's just, 1 terabyte drive is a single platter at that point. Current 1 terabyte drives, and this is up on PCPer.com. I'm not sure who wrote this article because I haven't quite gotten to the end of it yet, but it says current 1 terabyte drives using 2 500 gigabyte platters. 3 terabyte drives are using either 4 750 gigabyte platters or 5 600 gigabyte platters. So now obviously my head is all aflutter with the idea of a 5 terabyte hard drive, 5 1 terabyte platters.
Yep. And I mean, the problem with the 5 platter drive is heat builds up pretty bad when you've got, because the motor has to be spinning 5 times as many platters, and then you get issues with reliability. The more platters, the more heads you have spinning, the more things are going, the more chance there is for things to go wrong, right? So density helps affect all of that stuff. Plus, performance should increase as well. Anytime you get areal density increasing on a platter-based hard drive, you're going to see performance boosts as well.
I am excited. I wait with bated breath for the drives to ship. Should we thank our friends over at Netflix?
We definitely should, everybody. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Netflix. Netflix delivers movies directly to your home, saves you time, money, and hassle. Gone are the days of having to drive to your local movie rental store. You know what? To be honest with you, I don't even know where a local movie rental store is near my house anymore, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. After all the Blockbusters closed, I was kind of...
Is there a 7-Eleven near your house?
No, we don't have 7-Elevens on that far east. So
that's the closest one to me. Well, 7-Elevens are on the East Coast too, just like the Wawa.
No.
But
they're not in the Midwest where I am. You can also instantly watch thousands of TV episodes and movies streamed directly to your PC or Mac, or stream to your TV via Netflix-ready device like an Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, even a Nintendo Wii. Plus, you can still get DVDs by mail in about 1 business day. And Blu-rays as well if you sign up for that appropriate plan. Watch as many movies as you want, anytime you want. There are never any late fees and no due dates. That's what makes Netflix so great. Now, if you've never watched The Office, I don't know, Patrick, if you are a fan of The Office.
I have occasionally tuned in. It bears a painful resemblance to one of my previous employers.
Yes, and that's why so many people love it, I think. The Office is the Emmy-winning sitcom that, as it says here in the description, chronicles the daily foibles of office workers at the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company, where deluded boss Michael attempts to shepherd his disgruntled employees as a documentary film crew captures every wince-worthy moment. And I think you're right. That is, it speaks to so many people. That's why it's so popular over here. It started as a show in the UK, and they made a US version over here. And I remember when it first started, it was kind of a risky thing. They're like, are people going to like this kind of documentary style comedy that they're creating? And it's won a lot of awards. It's done very well. You can actually get the entire first season plus more streaming directly to your PC, Mac, or Netflix ready device instantly. All I have to do is go sign up for an account, and you can start watching The Office right away. I know Leo loves The Office because lots of times when we do the show, he would always say Shrout, Ryan Shrout. He would always bring out the similarities of my name to the beet farmer that is on that show as well. But if you want to instantly watch that show or choose from thousands of TV episodes or other movies, when you register for a free trial membership, all you have to do is go to netflix.com/twit, TWIT, and you can sign up for that or anything else, or start using one of the DVD by mail, Blu-ray by mail plans. That's netflix.com/twit, and we thank Netflix for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware.
Thank you, Netflix. Oscar's worried about SSD failure rates thanks to codinghorror.com. He says, hi, Ryan and Patrick. I recently came across his blog post about the high failure rate of SSD drives. Basically, if you go to codinghorror.com, you'll find that it's the top story up there. I'm wondering, do you guys have similar experiences? Any idea what's causing this? Is SSD drives reliability going to improve in the next few years? Thanks for making a great show. Regards, Oscar. I like the Coding Horror blog. Basically, I want to say Jeff Atwood, the guy who writes Coding Horror, 2 out of the 3 original solid state drives he bought for employees died. Crucial 128 gigabyte SSDs he bought in October 2009. As of last month, 2 out of 3 of those drives failed. And then he's got a buddy, Portman Wills, who has purchased 8 SSDs over the last 2 years. All of them failed. A Super Talent, OCZ Vertex, 2 G Skills, a Crucial, an OCZ Agility, and 2 Intel X25Ms. I found that deeply fascinating. I also want to know what the delete expletive he was putting those SSD drives into and what kind of power issues they have in his community.
Right.
Were those all, because here's the deal. The reason Intel was able to kind of jumpstart the solid state drive market so quickly is, one, they wanted to fill excess capacity at fabs. They wanted to sell more memory. SSDs obviously provide a performance jump. It's very exciting. They went to people like Dell and HP and Asus and said, hey, we want to sell you solid state drives. And they all, grabbed the garlic and the crucifixes and went, no, we will be dealing with terrible, terrible failure rates. And we'll have to deal with, half of the way computers are built has less to do with maybe, providing the maximum performance or the best experience, but minimizing the number of complaints when products fail, which is a gross oversimplification, but basically minimizing tech support calls is critical. So they said, we want you to deliver this amount of mean time between failure. And Intel went great and threw a number, basically delivered 5 times that or something as an estimated mean time between failure. I've got SSD drives. You've got SSD drives. Roger from Techzilla says SSD drives. There's an SSD drive. My wife's MacBook Air. I don't know anybody that's had 2 SSD drives fail, much less 8. So while I appreciate. Bad. Yeah, part of me appreciates, Jeff, who's, because he starts it off with, as an early advocate of solid state drives, and then he links to the articles. I feel ethically and morally obligated to let you in on a dirty little secret I've discovered in the last 2 years of full-time SSD ownerships. Solid state hard drives fail a lot. And here's the thing, like, on one hand, I admire him by being like, I may have, because part of what makes this article so funny is he basically goes into this whole sidebar about the hot versus crazy chart, and because he's basically saying that he doesn't care. He just bought like an OCZ Vertex 3. And he's like, just make sure you have a good backup plan and make sure you back up regularly. So on one hand, it's kind of funny because he's like, yes, they fail. We've had them fail. My friend is his 8 failed, but I just bought a new one because they're so stupid fast. So on one hand, one of the things I admire about Coding Horror is the dude's really good at crafting titles and content that is compelling. Yeah, as in good SEO and good eye gathering. And there's nothing, there's no, it's not quite as bad as those 2 guys who delayed their review of Toy Story 3, so they could be the 2 people that didn't give it like 100% on the tomato meter. But and I am absolutely not denying that he's had fails and other people have had fails and his friend has had 8 fails, but I'm saying this is circumstantial evidence. Right. If everybody, do you wonder
Do you wonder if the guy who has 8 SSDs has some configuration issue or something like that? That 8 SSDs that have failed on the span of 15 days to 512 days.
Yeah, and from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 manufacturers, and that's what I mean. That's what, like, and dude, I don't know Portman Wills. I'm sure he's awesome as a human being, but when I see, like, I've been in situations where we've had hardware from multiple vendors fail due to electrical issues or stuff like that. So when I see 8 drives from 5 different, I want to know what is he doing, and not because it's his fault, but because that's just that is, like, what I mean. The bell curve is,
it's a good data point.
Over here. Yeah, this guy over here at the bell curve is his SSD drive. He's still going to be using it in like 35 years because he's got this server running in a dark corner of a small office. And this guy over here is Portman Wills, who's had 8 drives die in the last couple of years. Most of us are going to be under that big, huge part of the bell curve.
I think one of his points here is that he's still using them, and he says he uses SSDs as if they're going to die. And I think, as we often talk about on the show, you should use all of your storage devices in that way. Hard drives or SSDs. You should always assume that tomorrow your computer's not going to turn on, or your hard drive's going to be dead, and you need to have your backup plans in place to take care of that, regardless if you're using an SSD or a spinning disk, right? They both have the potential to fail. I've sent this article now that you showed it to me over to our storage guy, and hopefully he'll be able to make some kind of comments on it as well, kind of give his idea. Nobody that I know has used more solid state drives than he has. Right. The idea is, how long has he used them over a continual basis too? So
I was thinking about that, like about Alan and about Anand over at AnandTech, Alan, who does the analysis for you guys at PC and I, something I remember telling somebody back when at one point I had tested like every notebook from every manufacturer, like the top 5 manufacturer. I'd probably been through 50 notebooks in this 2-year period. So maybe not every notebook, but at least one example of every major model. And I said to a friend of mine, it's like, I can't tell you how well this notebook's going to last in 2 years. I can tell you how well it's going to benchmark, and this and that and the other thing. I can tell you how the notebook I carry, full time performs. But it's one of the downsides of reviewing products is, more often than not, you get a product for a week, you get it for a month, you get it for 6 weeks, and
even if you get to keep the drive. If we've got 15 drives, we can't put them all on a machine that's going to be used every day to do like long-term studies. We just don't have that capability as, the small outfits that we tend to be. So
even the big outfits can't, justify. I mean, I don't even think consumer. Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to imagine Consumer Reports like running, a bunch of SSD drives, because they have to do the exact same things with the exact same parts and relatively the exact same configuration, and do it for, it would be cool if we could test it would be really cool if we could go into the future and find out which things are going to fail more often. But we're curious. Twitch at twitch.tv is the email. If you've been running into a lot of SSD fails, or, because we were talking about this on TechZilla too, if you're running into a lot of SSD fails, especially if you're doing corporate IT, or if you're working for a computer company and you get a lot of drives coming back, we're really curious to hear about that one. Cool. Speaking of which, Dan from Illinois wrote in. He's got a OCC Vertex 2 120 gig SSD. He says this drive ran amazingly fast and access times were insane. He's got it in all caps. After about 2 weeks of running it, my system started locking up whenever I would do something in Photoshop that required the use of the scratch disk. Thinking Photoshop was going nuts, I rebooted and tried again. Same thing, locking up, hesitating, lagging. I tried loading up Firefox, the same thing. Everything on my system is now lagging out horribly. After talking to a friend, he mentioned that I probably bricked the drive because I did not turn off prefetcher and index of that hard drive, since SSDs do not like these functions. What is the general rule of thumb when running an SSD with Windows 7 or XP? I know never defrag, but what else should be disabled, enabled, so my new shiny OCZ drive can run for years to come?
It's interesting. Well, obviously he's not, quote, bricked the drive, because it's still running and it's still operating the operating system and all that kind of stuff. I don't ever turn off indexing on the hard drive. Indexing is an important function of Windows 7 in terms of usability and being able to search things. And I have never turned off whatever the prefetcher is. I don't do any special configurations with Windows 7 at all. I just install Windows 7, boom, it handles all the other kind of stuff that it needs to do. So I'm not really sure what to say about this.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard, I think it was Tweaktown who did the article that they were like, disable indexing, enable write caching, disable defrag, disable system restore, disable superfetch, disable prefetch. I'm sorry, I probably should have sent this to Alan. Because I was curious about that, because I just run it normally and it seems to run okay. I'm also not doing gigantic Photoshop files on my scratch disk, so I'd be curious. Maybe you can forward this one to Alan and he can tell us what we should be doing. But I thought this was another extremely unusual situation, because I don't know anybody who's run into quite this situation unless they filled the hard drive and were running into problems.
That's true.
Without
if it's really full, you might see something like that.
Yeah, that was the thing of, do you have 118 gigabytes of data stuffed onto this drive? Did you accidentally, move your video collection onto the hard drive?
All right, let's see. We've got email from Frank here. Wants to know about running a Xeon on a P67. He says, hi, I've got a really simple question. Will the new Intel Xeon E3 series work in P67 motherboards? I know you're supposed to only use them in C204 boards, but it would seem that they'd work fine in P67 too? Question mark. That comes from Frank. I did a quick search, kind of looking around here, and it is the Xeon E3 series is a socket 1155 processor, and I think it will work just fine in a motherboard. It might report as a different CPU when you open up CPU ID or CPU Z or something like that, but there's no electrical reason why it won't. I will say though, I'm assuming you just have a Xeon E3 processor that you want to use, because they're more expensive than whatever the desktop counterpart is. So I wouldn't recommend going out and buying one. But if you just happen to have one and a P67 motherboard and you're wondering if you can just mash them together and make a computer, I believe the answer is yes.
I mean, is there any point other than a desperate desire to have like 6 cores and run 12 threads? I mean, is there any advantage? I mean, basically like 6-core Intel. So, at the high end, there's 6 cores. Most of them are 4 cores.
That's what I'm saying. The E3
12 megs of cache.
Yeah, I mean, electrically, I think it will work. Don't be surprised if you boot it up and the BIOS doesn't see it as that kind of processor, or Windows doesn't see it as the right kind of processor. And make sure you're using the latest BIOS. I think it will work. You're not going to. Let's put it this way: I don't think you're going to fry anything. At the worst case, it won't post. What I think will happen is it will report the wrong processor ID and blah blah blah, and maybe Windows will be a little confused. But it should run and it should use all of the resources on that CPU without a problem.
Oh, hey, you know what? I just found something I was looking for before from the MSDN blogs.msdn.com for engineering Windows 7. Where is it? Windows 7 will disable disk defragmentation on SSD system drives. Because SSDs perform extremely well in random read operations, defragmenting files isn't helpful enough to warrant the added disk writing defragmentation produces. By default, Windows 7 will disable superfetch, ready boost, as well as boot and application launch prefetching on SSDs with good random read, random write, and flush performance. These technologies were all designed to improve performance on traditional hard disk drives where random read performance could easily be a major bottleneck. And then since SSDs tend to perform at their best when the operating system's partitions are created with the SSD's alignment needs in mind, all of the partition creating tools in Windows 7 place newly created partitions with the appropriate alignment. Boom. So if you guys, sorry, I knew that thing was in there somewhere, but basically Windows 7, Dan, if you're running Windows 7, it should pretty much do everything it's supposed to do. So I almost would say you might want to try, formatting that drive and starting all over again.
Yeah, a good option.
Simon's got a relatively painless question. He says, hi, Patrick and Ryan. Love the show. Listen every week. Thank you, Ryan. I should say thank you, Simon. Thank you too, Ryan. I enjoy doing this show with you.
Thanks.
He says, I have a desktop PC with an Asus P5LD2VM/S motherboard. I currently have 2 gigabytes DDR2 RAM. I'm looking to upgrade to 3 or 4 gigs of RAM. The RAM is currently in 2 1-gigabyte sticks. I was wondering what would be the best way of upgrading. I'm running Windows 7 32-bit. Will I see a performance increase in everyday computing going to 4 gigabytes from 2? My free memory in Windows Task Manager says between 300 and 0. So this is a socket 775 motherboard with the Intel 945G chipsets, basically Intel Core Duo. My first thought is 32-bit Windows 7, you're only going to see 3 gigabytes of RAM. My second thought is, I'm not even sure, will this motherboard even support 4 gigabytes of RAM?
Oh, I'm sure it will. Yeah. It's, Windows 7 32-bit will only see 3.2 gigabytes of it, but it will kind of use the memory anyway. My personal opinion on this is memory is really cheap. If you want the least chance of compatibility issues, buy 2 gigabyte sticks of DDR2 memory, put them in there. I think you will see a boost going from 2 to 3.2 or 2 to 4 gigs of memory, regardless. And 2 gigs of memory just seems really low these days, I think, for for modern what people are doing, even online and all the flash stuff that goes on and that kind of thing. 4 gigs, I think, would be an advantage there.
I also want to add that I would also say, if you can upgrade to a 64-bit version of Windows 7, so you can see all 4 gigabytes in a full native configuration. Or if you're, how many gigabytes will that motherboard handle? I'm
not sure exactly. It would at least be 8. Socket 775 is probably 8 gigs or something like that, or maybe a little bit more. Also, don't be surprised when you put in more memory if you're doing the same stuff, and Task Manager still says you only have 300 to 0 megs free. Windows 7 uses all of your memory, regardless of what you're doing. Windows 7 will fill up your memory as much as possible. That doesn't mean it might have stuff in memory for an application you closed that when you start to open a new app, it will clear that out and refill it with different things. But, even on systems we've got that have 12 gigs of memory, a lot of times it will show less than a gig free the majority of the time, even when it's not doing much.
Okay, that motherboard supports 4 gigabytes max. Would you say add 2 more 1 gigabyte sticks or just upgrade to 2 gigabyte sticks?
I would say 2 gigabyte sticks because the older platforms have a little bit more issue with compatibility between memory modules, and so you're going to avoid complication if you get 2 gigabyte sticks. And I don't think it's going to be that much more expensive than getting 2 1 gigabyte sticks anymore. It will be more expensive, but I don't think it's going to be any more than like $40 or something like that, maybe.
Right.
Just kind of guessing in the air. So yeah.
I'd also say don't worry too much about looking for qualified memory as listed on the Asus website or anything like that. Basically, I prefer branded memory. I buy a lot of Crucial memory. They've done pretty well by me over the years. But basically, you're looking for DDR2 667. If you find something faster than that, it should still run in the sockets. But don't kill yourself trying to find the ultimate Mushkin memory or some obscure branded memory you'd never heard of because it's listed in the the vetted memory section of the website, the manufacturer website for this. Because we tend to get really uptight about memory and I need to reduce my cache latency and step back.
Indeed.
Zadkiel tweets at Patrick Norton, how does one store NAS drives in their home? The fans are starting to get loud. I want to warn everybody right now as we head into the hot summer season. It's been 75 degrees here in San Francisco, which sounds, it's 75 degrees, but very few buildings in San Francisco that are much older than basically every older building in San Francisco, A, doesn't have AC, and B, oftentimes doesn't have fans. So if it gets up to over 80 degrees, if it's 80 degrees outside, it's usually 100 inside of our office building here at Revision 3, which makes recording Techzilla in the studio super fun under the lights. But because it's usually like 58 to 65 here, so if it actually gets hot, everything falls apart. I bring that up for the rest of the contiguous United States, where it actually gets genuinely hot, and if it's 95 degrees outside, chances are it's 62 degrees inside most of your home, and it's still 95 or 125 degrees in your closets because there's no AC venting in your closets. Be very careful about taking expensive computers or expensive NAS boxes and stuffing them in a closet, because when the closet door is closed, you can't hear them. If you do decide to do this, figure out a way to ventilate your closet, at the very least passively ventilate it by putting in a vent at the top of it or something. Because there's nothing sadder than getting an email from like, I got up to like 118 degrees in my house and my computer, my home server crashed and took out my entire Blu-ray collection. So I will say, try to store your NAS drives. If you're in a part of the world where basements don't flood, I highly recommend putting them in the basement and then connecting them to your Ethernet network. If you know what I mean, just you want to get them out of the living room and out of the office, even the quiet ones. Especially if you're the kind of woman or guy that likes to type at 4 a.m. when the rest of the family is asleep.
Right.
42 decibels. I can't hear a 42 decibel device when my son is awake, but at 4 in the morning, like 22 decibel devices sound like fire horns. Whatever a fire horn is, I think fire siren is what I was thinking of. So, to sort of encapsulate this before I sort of wander on, one, put them away from the places where you normally work. Two, put them in places where they're, not going to fall off or fall down if you have children or earthquakes. If you're in earthquake country and you put them on a bookshelf, strap it down to the bookshelf and make sure the bookshelf is secured to the wall. If your basement doesn't flood, I highly recommend basements. You plug the NAS into a UPS device, that is, or at the very least a surge protector, and attach it to the gigabit Ethernet network in your home. If you have issues with huge temperature changes or a lack of cooling, I would, basically if your garage gets up to 120 degrees in the summer because there's no AC and there's no ventilation in there, I would hesitate before putting my expensive data in my expensive NAS drive in the garage where it gets up to 120 degrees. Am I missing anything?
Get quieter fans. I don't know.
That's
an option too.
That is definitely, or see if there's an option for turning down the speed on the fans inside the NAS box. Because the problem is, hard drives generate heat, especially when you're accessing them. And it would suck to minimize the noise and corrupt your data or kill a drive. That just always sucks.
Don't kill that. Let's see. Kyle has an interesting question here. He asks, I currently have my monitor on top of my desk in front of an open window. Since it's the only window in my room, I like to have it open all the time. Am I doing any damage to the monitor, short or long term, by having the window open all of the time? I close it when it rains, of course, and I live in the Twin Cities, and it doesn't really get humid here. It's kind of an interesting question. Obviously, closing it when it rains is very important. Water and large LCD monitors probably don't work out well. I can't think of anything if it's not super humid. Air control or HVAC systems and quality or control of the air environments is always a little bit better. But I can't imagine, the sunlight doing anything other than maybe bleaching the paint on the back of the monitor or something like that. Maybe making it a little bit hotter than it would normally be.
If you're in thunderstorm territory and you're not home all the time, close the window before you leave the house. I think of this because of incidents when I was younger and living in Pennsylvania, where or Florida actually. There's it seems like Kissimmee, Florida. I think is 3:30 every afternoon for several months a year. You get a regular thunderstorm. When I lived near the ocean in San Francisco, I was living 3-4 blocks off the ocean, and there was this very wet, heavy fog. And anything that was stored in an area where we didn't have pretty good heat and kept the windows closed had unbelievable amounts of salt incrustation inside the boxes. Basically anything I had in my garage got trashed. But yeah, a window, if you shut the window when you leave. My thought was doesn't the monitor block the nice flow of fresh air?
True.
Brother, that was my primary concern. If you're near an ocean, you
It's
have
also
issues.
probably not good for viewing it, right? I mean, if the sunlight's coming right in and your screen's right here.
It tends to be a little. Well, actually, that's not entirely true, because like if you're configuring a home theater and you have a decent LED, one of the reasons they started playing around there's this whole system of you can kind of hack it yourself by basically putting some LED lamps behind your home theater, your HDTV, so that you create sort of a light halo of light around the screen, because going from a black room to a bright screen kind of makes your eyeballs explode out of your head.
That's true.
But yeah, plastic might fade, thunderstorms if the window's not shut. But I don't know, kids throwing baseballs through the window. I mean, people, is it on the first floor? Is somebody going to see your nice monitor there and reach through your window and steal it? I think you're fine leaving it there.
Yeah.
That's pretty much everything I can think of. Do we have time for one more question, or should we quit?
Sure. Let's do Crash Plan.
This was interesting. Daniel wrote in from Ireland. Whoops, actually, I'm looking at the wrong question in there. I think I just managed to skip forward. So it is Daniel in Ireland. Sorry, it's Dennis in Ireland. Says a few weeks ago, probably more, you mentioned the size of storage you guys have and the problems backing up all the data to the cloud due to either the speed of the uploads. Be thankful for what you have. He says in Ireland, we are still in the Stone Age on broadband speeds, or maxing out your monthly upload usage caps on whatever providers you use. Obviously, Carbonite got the most limelight. Hey, Carbonite's a sponsor, and I've been using them on and off for years. But you did mention CrashPlan briefly. So as Carbonite is not available to us in Ireland, I had a look at CrashPlan, and it is excellent so far. The reason he's emailing, though, is because of CrashPlan's seeded backup service. They send you a hard drive, you back up everything onto the drive, send it back to them, and when they connect it to your account, your online backup picks up where you left off with the drive. I haven't tried this part of the service, as I'm not sure it's available outside of the USA, but it certainly sounds good, he says. Also, the free version of CrashPlan doesn't let you back up to the cloud, but it does let you back up to computers at other locations. It also lets you do the same seeded backup. So you can take your own personal backup drive to another location, your office, your parents, your trusted friend, install CrashPlan, connect to your account, and it picks up where you left off. So far, I love it, says Dennis P. We had been struggling to find a nice backup method for the home with Mac and PCs and small offices, so thanks for mentioning them. So, yeah, hey, you know what? If you're outside of the U.S. and you can't get Carbonite, by all means, check out CrashPlan. And I wonder if they'll send me one of those new Seagate 5 terabyte drives that I want to seed things.
The peer-to-peer option sounds pretty cool, right? I mean, if you've got a home and an office, that are separated by a good amount, just bring a hard drive back and forth, swap it once, and have them back and forth to each other. That sounds like a pretty good idea to me.
It was funny. One of the questions we answered on Texilla this week, this guy has the most out of control NAS situation I've ever heard of. The short version is he's got like 16 2-terabyte drives in various RAID configurations with, I'm guessing, about 12 terabytes of data on them. And his RAID card is dying, and he needs to move to a new RAID card. I was like, he's like, how do I do this without
situation?
I'm like, you're going to be buying some new hard drives.
Yeah, that's rough.
Do you know anybody with 8 terabyte NAS you can borrow for a few days? Maybe a week, because it's also, when you're talking about moving terabytes and terabytes of data, often just moving them from one NAS to another can take days and days to do. You want to do Daniel's SSD question or Reese and IPv6?
Let's do Reese. Reese, something. He wants to talk about IPv6 and how it will affect him. I'm an Australian subscriber to your podcast and thoroughly enjoy the show. Great job, fellas. I have a mixed hardware-software question regarding the eventual switchover to IPv6. Is this likely to affect us consumers in the future? What types of hardware would be affected? I assume only internet-facing machines, i.e. servers and routers and the like, rather than internal machines, are going to be affected. Will IPv6 devices be able to talk to IPv4 devices, or is it more like a supernet, therefore another logical internet? I think your kind of assumption of only internet-facing machines need to worry about this. If for instance, if in your home your router's IPv6 ready, that's usually, not always, but usually the only machine on your network that has an actual external IP address. Everything else is using like a 192.168 blah 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 IP address, and those can stay IPv4 internally on your home network for as long as you want, right? You're not going to run out of IP addresses in that range in your own internal network. So I think it's really, I think it is servers and internet-facing machines, your router, something like that, is really the only thing that's going to be a potential issue.
Unless, yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. I've been assiduously avoiding researching how Comcast plans to deal with IPv6.
Cable modems are going to have to be upgraded, I think, in a lot of cases, that type of thing. So that really falls on to Comcast and your local cable company or DSL provider to try to figure out what's going to happen with that.
Hey, look at that. There is a Comcast IPv6 Information Center.
There you go.
Wow. This site is intended to provide the latest information about Comcast IPv6 related work. We are conducting several IPv6 technical trials in our production network with customers in order to prepare for the transition. So they participated in World IPv6 Day. 6RD deactivation is planned.
Most modern routers claim support for IPv6, so I think. Yeah. I think most people will be okay. Now, there's always the possibility of, well, they had IPv6 support, but they really couldn't test it on much. So, we're just going to say it and throw it out there and see what sticks. So, there will be headaches, I'm sure, just like the analog to digital TV transition, right? But hopefully it won't be that bad.
It's interesting. Like they said, they did their first IPv6 native dual stack over DOCSIS. Basically, the DOCSIS 3.0, that's the cable modem standards. And they set it up so users, quote, can now access content and services natively over both IPv6 and IPv4. So they didn't have to do any tunneling, translating, or NAT. They can access IPv6 and IPv4 directly at high speed in an unencumbered fashion. Quote, this is a tremendous milestone for Comcast, cable operators, and the internet community at large. So that's actually really cool in terms of, making IPv6 function in the home. It's going to be really, I mean, it's kind of funny because people have been moving towards IPv6 forever. The government, the U.S. federal government made IPv6 compatibility a standard for all the routers and computer hardware they were purchasing years and years ago, specifically so that any new equipment they bought would be ready for the IPv6 transition. I think it's going to be interesting to see what, when people eventually flip the switch, what routers are not impacted. And the other thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, but they can pretty much leave IPv4 running as long as possible, as long as they own the IP addresses on that network. The whole point of creating IPv6 was to deal with the fact that they're running out of IPv4 addresses. So I think it's going to be, interesting to see if it, I think it's going to impact large web providers and hosts and ISPs a lot more than it's going to impact end users. Because again, this goes back to the thing I was talking about, with SSDs being provided by big computer companies, is Comcast doesn't want to get 24 million or 27 million or however many subscribers they have now calling up because IPv6 broke their connection to the internet. So it'll be interesting to see how this is implemented and how long it takes to roll out. I normally, talk a lot of flack about Comcast, but generally speaking, my internet doesn't break and it runs fast. So.
Exactly.
That's pretty much all I can ask for out of an internet provider.
Yep.
So, will you be back in Ohio next week, or are we going to get another little call from
Kentucky?
Exotic,
But yes.
a new
Kentucky, but yes.
Is it the Derby this weekend or next weekend?
It is this Saturday, actually, and we found a local bar here in the islands that is having a derby party on Saturday, actually, which is kind of funny.
Nothing says the Virgin Islands like a mint julep.
Yeah, yeah, and big hats for the women.
Oh man,
it's crazy. It'll be fun.
I think we're going to call, draw the line in the sand, call that the end of This Week in Computer Hardware. Twitch at twit.tv is the email. We love your questions. We need your questions. We want to hear. And again, we asked earlier, if you're running into SSD failure rates that are higher than you expected, tell us about it. If you see some news that excites you, tell us about it. If you got a computer question, a hardware question, tell us about it. In fact, we should probably talk about the 4G stuff we were looking at. Verizon 4G LTE, very fast. Very, very fast. Shockingly
not here.
fast here.
Not here. I have a modem, but it's not here. Imagine that. No 4G in the Virgin Islands.
There's no 4G. I could drive 8 miles east of my house and probably run out of 4G coverage. Yeah. And that's the problem with 4G is it's not everywhere. With that bright and cheerful note, I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week on Twitch.